Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to VAC's webinar series. As everyone gets logged on, drop your name in the chat box on the right-hand side and let us know you're here. We hope everyone had a good Easter weekend, and we're glad to have you here with us today. On previous videos, we've discussed mounting, calibration, feedback, and modularity of the V200. And on today's video, Scott is going to be discussing troubleshooting procedures. We do want to know if you have any questions, so make sure you drop those in the right-hand side in the chat bar, and we'll do our best to answer them all. At the end of the video, if there's too many questions to answer, then we will answer them all in the comment section under this video. We also have helpful technical tips and videos available on our website, or you can give us a call. All of our contact info and website links are linked below in the description of this video. And now I'm going to hand it over to Scott.
Well, as we're kind of trying to get everything started here, let a few more people log on if they'd like. Kind of reiterate what Carly said today. We're going to go over some simple troubleshooting stuff. We're going to kind of start with some basics, the calls we get the most of. This is one of those things that there could be any number of issues, but we're going to focus on the main things we see. Really, when it comes to types of issues we see, there's kind of two types of issues. There's first type of issues, which are general setup issues, which really kind of relates back to our first video where we showed mounting, calibration, and setup of the positioners. We'll go over some of that. And then the other type of issues we see are installed on actuators and valves that have been in service for quite some time. But first, we're going to kind of focus on the first things that we see. And we get the vast majority of calls we get have to do with cam setup. On the setup type issues. And what's going to happen with these issues is generally you're going to see some type of operation that you don't want. There's not expected operation. But we're going to start off from the get-go. Once you've got your positioner mounted up, calibrated, and you think you've got it calibrated, and you go to stroke the valve and it doesn't operate properly. Several different things that could be. But the first thing we're going to look at is we're going to make sure you got a good air supply. That happens a lot of times that we'll have somebody, they'll have a spring return valve. They don't have 80-pound springs in it, but they're putting 60 pounds of air on it. The valve may operate, but it's not going to operate 0 to 100%. It can only go so far. So that's the first thing we're going to check is we're going to check, make sure that the supply gauge is reading of sufficient supply pressure. A second issue we're going to look at is a big problem we see is where the source of the signal is. A lot of times signal generators can have option of having loop power or just the signal. We want to make sure we have power and signal on the same circuit. And oftentimes, and another issue is, what am I going to take the cover here? On our IDPs, we'll have the control room with wires landed to the terminal strip, and they're supposed to be giving us a 4 to 20 milliamp signal. We can't always guarantee that, and we can't just assume that. So we actually have test points on the V200 here that we can test what the actual incoming signal is. The other option is generally what I like to do a lot is just remove it from the system and then use a handheld. But leading back into the general setup issues we have is because we don't have a signal generator that's giving the correct signal, or we don't see supply pressure, or it's a cam setup issue. Another issue is tubing. If you have a single acting actuator, and you're hooking up the positioner, you have to make sure you're tubed properly, and that the second port, if you're just single acting tubing it, which means you're going to tube with one piece of tubing between the actuator and the positioner, you want to make sure that your second port is plugged and that you're using the correct port. Another issue we see commonly is people can't get the positioner to drive to 100%. We've actually seen people come in and plug the vent. We don't ever want to plug the vent on the positioner. That is an issue, and what that will do is it won't allow the positioner to stroke properly because the air can go nowhere. It's stuck inside the positioner. So those are things we see a lot on the setup, and what those are basically no signal, no air, tubed wrong. A lot of times what that's going to give you is as you increase or change your signal, you're going to see nothing happen. It just won't work. So to break down to each particular type of issue, we have two types of issues. Once you get into troubleshooting, you've got one where the positioner just doesn't work, and then one where it exhibits some behavior that's undesired, meaning as soon as you give it signal, it goes full open, any signal. Or as soon as you put air on it, it goes full open and it should be closed. Those are the type of things we're now going to look at, and we're going to kind of demonstrate a couple of them and how to fix them. And they're the most common issues we see. The most common issue we see, I'm going to go ahead and remove the indicator. We've removed the cover. I'm going to remove the little arrow indicator, is on our cam. Oftentimes, we've gone through the video. Oftentimes what happens is this cam is set on the wrong side. We know that there's a little roller bearing, and then it seats right up against the point, and there's a 0 and 100%. If you have it set on 0% and you have it rotating the wrong way, oftentimes what it'll do is it'll jump over the lobe and it won't operate properly. And I'm going to demonstrate how this positioner acts in that circumstance. So currently, we've got it 4 milliamps. I'm going to go and put the indicator on so you can see it a little better. Now, as I increase signal, what is going to happen is we're going to see the positioner move, but it's not going to move quite properly. So as we increase signal, we see that it almost went all the way open on an 8 milliamp signal change. So this is 20 milliamps. We're at 12 milliamps coming down, 4 milliamps coming down, and notice it doesn't act quite properly. You're getting almost full stroke, but not quite. But you see that we don't get that fluid action, smooth action from 4 to 20 milliamps. It doesn't ramp up, and it's not a linear curve as we'd like to see. So we know that initially that what we have to look at is our cam setup is an issue. It's going to be hard for you guys to see, but what we want to do is we want to reset this cam, and I'm going to do that. And if you want a little better detail of that, you can go back to the first video and see how to set up the cam properly. But I'm going to change it real quick. I'm going to show this one more time so you can see what happens. So I'm going to show 4 milliamps, 5 milliamps, 6, up to 8. It jumps well over 50%. So now we're at 12 milliamps. We should be at 50%. We're almost 100%. And at 20, we go to full open. So what we want to do is cut the air to the unit. And to show one quick thing is to make sure that this isn't the issue. When you tube the unit up back to the first, we're going to refer back to the first video. Once you put air on the unit, the best thing to do is reach inside and push the balance arm down, and you can see it'll show you at that point that you're jumping the cam. But if you skip that step, this is something you can come back and look at later. So I'm going to shut the air off. Loosen the cam nut. Set the cam back to the correct position. Cut the air back on. And now as we ramp it up, we see that it's operating properly. So it was a simple cam setup issue. Another issue that we see oftentimes is that the cam is loose. When the cam is loose, this is another part of the operation that you don't want it to, that it's undesired operation. And generally what happens when the cam is loose, there's a couple of different things that will show the same symptom: a cam loose or the spindle not engaged in the back of the positioner. What's going to happen is as soon as you start introducing a signal, it's going to drive fully open. Even if it doesn't take very much signal at all, it's going to drive fully open, and it's not going to modulate. So it defeats the whole purpose. But back to, like we said, by far and away the biggest issue we have on these is initial setup is the cam. Very seldom, occasionally we might see one come loose after it's been in service for a while, but that's generally because it wasn't installed properly initially. again, the things we're speaking to now are really mainly all setup issues. Are all going to be truly just setup issues. If the cam is not set and tightened properly, at 4 milliamps, everything is fine, but as soon as we start increasing signal, that's 1 milliamp increase to 5 milliamps, and it drives all the way open. And you go back to 4, and it will not stroke because there's no feedback to the cam, and it's going to stroke very slowly. These are all, like I said, the most common issue is a cam setup issue. Going back to operating, looking at a valve. So that's mainly the setup issues. Generally, the biggest things to watch out for are cam setup and the tubing, making sure the tubing is oriented properly, that you don't have the tubing reversed and that it's going for the particular operation you're looking for. There's a whole bunch of different ways you can set it up, and those things are something we talk people through quite often, that they want to operate it a certain way, whether it's increasing signal opens or closes, and making sure that the fail open or fail close valve works properly. It's things we do quite often on the phone. We've shown cam setup on the wrong side, and we've shown the loose cam. Another issue, what happened, we're going to go now more to stuff you see. The second type of problems we see, that's mainly the setup, what we would call setup issues. Another type of problem we see is when something's been in service for a while. As we know, most times, all plants have clean, dry air. So most of the issues we see will be involved with that. But there's a couple of things we can look at and do and check, and we'll go through those real quick. Where once you've got a positioner on and it's been working for a while, you're happy with the service, but all of a sudden it's not working quite properly. Or let's start with it's just not functioning at all. You can kind of go back to the same issues to look at the same things. Make sure you have good supply. Make sure you have a good signal. And this is where I was speaking to earlier, where the control room is generally wired into the terminal strip, and you have to rely on that sometimes. But for me, I always want to remove the control room wiring and hook up my own signal generator. That way I know I'm getting a good signal, clean signal, and I can eliminate any issues. I can verify the functionality of the positioner without having to trust something that I have the variable that I have no control over. Again, same thing. I'm going to hook. If this is out in the field, it's not working, the first thing you can do is you can pull down on that balance arm, make sure that it's pneumatically working. That will kind of give you an idea if the actuator and valve and everything's working properly, or at least that it's tubed properly. Another large thing that is most helpful for me in the field and even on the phone is troubleshooting is gauges. Specifically the I-port gauge, which is the gauge on the top. What that's going to tell us is basically tells us the health of our I2P and this instrument circuit. Even if it is a pneumatic unit, this is an electro-pneumatic unit, even if it's a pneumatic unit that has a remote mounted I2P in a cabinet, or they're using an old controller or something spitting out a 3 to 15 signal, it'll let you know that if you don't see 15 PSI on this at 100% and this valve isn't driving all the way, then you know there's something wrong in that instrument circuit, whether it's the I2P is bad on an electro-pneumatic or you've got a leak from here to your controller. Things you'll have to start looking for. But what the symptom of that is going to be, once you give it 100% signal, the valve cannot drive to 100% and you don't see 15 PSI on this gauge, there's something wrong in that instrument circuit. If it's an I2P, electro-pneumatic with an I2P, generally what we'll do is we'll pull this I2P out and we'll look, there's 2 filters on the back side. And we'll look at those filters. We'll look at them. We'll pull one here and show you. We'll look at those filters and see if they're discolored. They're really white filters. And if you get a bunch of oil, there's 2 filters in this area here. And if you have a lot of issues with oil and dirt, those will become clogged and discolored and be brown, or any number of colors. But that'll be the first issue that you'll see that we kind of look for. And that's kind of a dead giveaway that the I2P has been full of water, that it's not functioning. But like I said, the important thing is that on this 3 to 15 gauge, that at 4 milliamps you see 3 psi, and at 20 milliamps you see 15 psi. But like I said, the other supply gauges will help you calibrate, and it can help you determine if there's an issue anywhere with your inside the actuator, where if you're putting full pressure and you can't get it calibrated, you're showing bleed across. It could be leaking through on the actuator or something along those lines. But like I said, gauges are always going to be your friend when you're troubleshooting on these positioners specifically. Another issue you'll see is another operation that you don't want to see is, now we've determined that everything works, but we have to see a large increase in signal to get the positioner to move. Or when we do see the positioner move, it overshoots and comes back and it's hunting back and forth. We call this oscillation. And what that's generally due to is contaminated air. What happens is your pilot valve gets a bunch of trash in it. And the thing that we're going to try to get you to do is we're going to say, hey, do me a favor, cut the air off. Let's pull the pilot valve and let's check it. And what you want to see is with the pilot valve, you want to hold the pilot valve parallel to the floor. And when you turn it, you want to see that gold stem slide out. If it doesn't slide out, or there's showing any type of friction, then there's a good chance that there's been contamination, oil, dirt, whatever in there. And we're going to pull this pilot valve apart and we're going to clean it. But like I said, the symptoms you're going to see is that as you increase signal, you're not going to get a good steady, the positioner's not going to be steady. It's going to be hunting around. And what it is the drag on this spool is increased. So it's lost its sensitivity. And what we do with those is we clean those. We use CRC industrial cleaner. That's what we use. We want to use something with non-residue and a pipe cleaner, simple craft shop style pipe cleaner. But what we'll do is we'll just pull it out, pull the pilot out, the spool out, we'll spray through it. And then what you can do is you can clean the pilot or the pilot with just a piece of white paper. You'll pinch your fingers in there on the stem, and you'll just turn each one of those lobes and polish each lobe. Once you get it back, once you pull it, make sure you're sufficiently clean. We're gonna put it back together and just make sure that it moves freely, like we said. And once you install it, you should see the oscillation go away. Oftentimes, the pilot valve could be really worn over, if it's been in service for a lot of years and sees a lot of strokes. There's some things do kind of wear it, and you might want to replace the pilot. But again, with the V200, there's two main components that you're going to want to take with you on a service call if you go, and that's going to be a IDP and a pilot valve. That's going to really help most things. But when we get these calls in from day to day, that's the things we get the calls on the most. Like Carly said, I kind of reiterate what she said earlier, that if we've got a lot of questions on this, and this is something that you guys may see things that we haven't seen yet, ask us, give us a call. We'll see what we can do to help you out, and we'll work through it. But like I said, the biggest things we say are setup issues with the cam, and then just air quality issues that have either damaged the IDP due to oil or moisture getting through it, and the same thing with a pilot. But luckily with a pilot, most times it can be cleaned, and we should, put it back in service without having to replace it. But for today, I think we're going to stick with that. Like I said, if there's more questions, if we get a lot of questions, and we'll go back and check the chat and see if there's a bunch of things people are looking for or have questions about, we may extend this, and next week we'll answer those questions directly. If not, we'll definitely answer a few of the questions into the message section of the video, so you can see that. We'll try to contact you as well if you have a question. So, Carly, you have any questions?
There is a question from Greg in the chat now, and his question is, what microfilter is recommended for control air to pilot valve?
I think, if I'm not mistaken, we use 5. I think it's 5 micron is what we're using, but I'll have to double check that and get back with you on that. If I'm not mistaken. There are ISO air purification standards, and to be honest, I'd hate to quote them off the top of my head right now and just be wrong. So we'll give a second, see if anybody has any questions. If not, I think we're probably going to end that here today. And we'll be back next week. And next week, Carly, I think, is going to let us know what we're looking at doing next week if we don't have questions and extend this particular section to another section.
So if you guys don't have any more questions next week, Same time, Tuesday, 1:30. Join in and we're going to introduce some of our digital positioners.
And so if that is all, we will see you then. Well, we do have some more questions coming through, so we're
Okay.
not ending that quick.
Okay.
The question is there any way to purge dirt or oil out of the IDP?
Oil is going to be tough. What we do, we have tried in the past, is we have taken and just blown into these filters, and we've had some success on positioners that have had a bunch of oil or moisture through them and bringing them back to life if they're stuck. The little needle, the little air nozzle in there could get something in it, and you might be able to dislodge a piece of trash or something that way. But that's really it. And you can put full, put 60 PSI on a blower and blow in those two ports, and maybe it'll help. Once you pull that, you can turn the air back on the unit and make sure you blow everything out of these two ports. Make sure you don't blow the O-rings out. If you do, you want to make sure you catch them and put them back when you put the I2P back in. But that is a possibility that you can try that. But oftentimes when the I2P is damaged, it's usually due to moisture, and there's some small wires in there that kind of are the problem generally that sees the issue due to the moisture.
Okay, well, that looks like it's all of our questions. So we will see you next Tuesday at 1:30 for digital positioners.
All right.